Hey, this is Timmara signing on with some more of Dear Esther. Okay, so even though I finished the game last time in one shot, decided to come back, because basically decided to come back, replay it, quotations, with the knowledge I know from finishing the game and also with director's commentary on, because I did Forgone Home, might as well do it for this. And before we begin, I'm just gonna, this is part 2, so part 1, played the whole game in one session, and tried to dissect what I could understand at the time. And so, before I begin, here's just going to be my thoughts on, what the story of the game is. And I'm trying to remember names now, because it's been a day, and, it didn't really grab me. But, okay. So, after doing some reading, I went on some Steam forums, Reddit, just a couple other things, just to, look at, other people's interpretations, just, try and dissect it. And no one really seems to agree on what the game is. Okay, we know about, our characters. We got Paul, our character, Paul Jacobson. People can't seem to agree on that. Esther Donnelly, who, based on the ultrasound picture that we found, was supposedly pregnant before, she died in a car accident, which people can't seem to agree on is if it was Paul's fault or if it was unrelated. But apparently something that will be mentioned in the director's commentary that people like to talk about is, at the very least, the only thing we know about Paul is that he's in a coma. So this entire island is a figment of our imagination, but, is this a real island Paul knows about, or is this just, completely constructed in his mind? So, I don't know. People have talked about, a lot of different interpretations on, what everything means, or how the order of events go in. And some people have said, that's what's so good about Dear Esther, is that it's up to you to make up your own interpretation. Which, I can see that, but there's so little to work with that, no matter how I seem to, put the pieces together, just something seems wrong. So, there's something to that open-endedness, but let's just go again. So, Lighthouse. Jacobson, whatever. Let's start a new game with a director's commentary on, just to hear thoughts from the director, and maybe see if I missed anything. Oh god, good. The director's commentary things are
Hello,
labeled.
I'm Dan Pinchbeck, I'm the creative director of The Chinese Room, and this is the Dear Esther developer's commentary.
Hi, I'm Rob Briscoe. I'm the artist on Dear Esther.
Oh, Jesus.
And I'm Jessica Curry, and I was the composer on the game.
So what you're looking at today is a remake of a mod. Dear Esther started off in 2007 as a Half-Life 2 mod that did really, really well in the modding community, which was fantastic, and as a result of that attracted the attention of Rob, who worked as the primary developer on a Source remake of the game that was released in 2012. And this year is another remake where it's been updated for a cross-platform release, and we wanted to add in this developer's commentary just to give you a bit more of an insight into some of the ideas behind the game as it came together.
Okay. And I'm not usually the director's commentary guy, on anything. I used to actually watch a bunch of, movie commentary as a kid.
You'll see around you in a lot of the environments, there's
okay,
a lot
triggers.
of detail
just by walking through it
into everything. One of the things that I wanted to do with Dear Esther is bring the visuals up to the same kind of level of detail that Dan and Jess had put into the other areas of the game. So all of the history and the kind of hidden pieces of story that are intertwined with the VOs and the music and stuff, I kind of wanted to bring some of that into the environments.
Trying to find all these
so
notes is going to take a while.
You see that there's a lot of interesting bits and pieces, a piece of paper with someone's name on it, a photograph, an ultrasound. All of these little bits and pieces are kind of laid in to just kind of bring another aspect of the story into the game. And also, they're actually randomized, so every time you play, you'll see something different lying around.
Okay.
And this is just to build on this idea that everybody has a unique experience and a unique interpretation of the story.
Okay. And I've had some people say that where, sometimes even, I guess, some journal entries that you hear are also sometimes different, and, placement of items is different. So that's interesting, kind of like a procedurally generated, walking sim. Just where the problem comes in is that I don't know what's important or what to do to trigger things. And this freaking walking speed. So I'm trying to cover as much ground as possible. I think, maybe with director commentary on, we completely shut out, what do you want to call them? The...
Part of the point about the whole game, I think, was this idea that rather than having a linear, straight-through version of the story, that we could have multiple story units for each place you were. And I was really interested in this idea of how you can open up that space that people can interpret. So I loved the idea that you could have two people that had played this game and then would have a conversation about it, and one of them would say, oh, what did you think about when this happened? And the other person would be like, well, that didn't happen to me. I had a completely different event happen or a completely different story happen. And it kind of feels very gamey in that way, that actually one of the things I love about writing for games is that you hand over so much control to the player that it becomes their story, and that's really, really important rather than trying to force them. So using randomised blocks of voiceover in the game and the kind of randomised prop details that Rob was talking about means that it gives it a really different feeling every time you go through. And that's kind of interesting for me, because I like the idea of going, well, not everyone has to have the same experience, and because it's interactive, you have the capacity to have very different experiences occupying the same space. So yeah, but balancing all that then becomes an absolute nightmare.
I think it's nice though, because everybody gets a personal experience. Like, I love reading the forums and seeing how people come and they sort of tell their story and what they interpreted of it, and then you see other people discussing what they thought of it. And to me, it's kind of nice because everybody takes something unique away from it.
Yeah, I see what they're going for, and I guess it kind of works. It's just I like, more concrete answers. It's just sort of like, again, no matter how I piece the story together, it just feels like something's wrong or some piece is missing or something doesn't add up.
There was absolutely no budget whatsoever for live players, so all the music was sampled. But one of the good things about that is it actually forced me to be quite creative about how I wrote the music. So with my background in sound art, I wanted to use samples in a different way that wasn't just using it to sound like a violin. I wanted to time stretch and manipulate samples to make something different and strange and quite unique. But then when we got the
I don't mean to just stand still on all this commentary. Oh my god.
Music with live players. And that was so exciting for me, actually, because that's where it comes to life. And I thought long and hard about whether to write new music, going from the mod to the commercial version, but actually I decided that my initial and original emotional...
Okay, sorry, don't mean to cut you off, Jess. It's just we got a lot to cover, and...
The landscape is not an island, it's the dream of an island. The music is like music that you wake up because you've heard in your sleep, but you're not conscious of hearing it. And the language in the story was supposed to be like that as well. It didn't matter the sense it made, it was more about the kind of the shapes it created, if that makes sense.
It does. It just
the words would kind of were like being in water, like listening to something underwater. It'd be this very dreamlike, symbolic, poetic thing, and it always had frustrated me in games with game writing. This has really changed quite a lot. There was never any space for poetic language. It's very exposition-y, very descriptive, very direct. And you'd have like art and audio would have these amazing creative spaces they could explore. But when it came down to actually writing, you just had to basically go into the room, describe the character, tell the player what to do. And it just seemed like the most boring thing you could do with words in a game. And why couldn't a writer have the same artistic freedom as a visual artist or an audio designer or a musician, in terms of being able to say, isn't this just about creating this kind of emotional tone, this emotional space? And it's really, I still love that about the game. It's one of the things I love so much about Nigel's voiceover, is it has this really odd, disconnected, kind of dreamlike quality to it, where you might finish the game and not actually understand anything that happened.
Yeah, that's kind of a problem with the writing, though.
The flow of it. And without any kind of sarcasm at all, I get into trouble saying things like this. The same design principle applies as this to Halo. It's 30 seconds of fun, or 30 seconds of depressing engagement, I guess, in our case. But it is about that loop of being in the moment in the game constantly, and that's actually the critical thing that matters.
I see what he's saying, don't get me wrong. And, he's right. The flowery language is certainly interesting and, disconnected, but when you can't decipher, like, what's going on, that's one thing, but I do see what he means. And, yeah, I get his point, like, you know, yeah, Halo, you 30 seconds of run and gun, this 30 seconds of, like, this weird, like...
This symbol on the beach,
Anyways.
which is the golden ratio, it's one of the only things that's really left explicitly from the mod. In the original mod, there was an awful lot of more kind of symbols and kind of a much more kind of mystical, sort of magical element to the island. There was a lot of very weird stuff in there. And a lot of them came out of the commercial version because they felt like they were a little bit explicit. And instead, there's a lot more hidden kind of codes and symbols in there. There's still some stuff which you can only actually see or experience if you are not playing the game, if you're looking at it from editor. We had in the original mods things like trees planted to mirror the shape of the M5, or there's a whole bunch of things that are there to represent star clusters and all kinds of things like that. And we'll probably talk a bit more about kind of like hidden details and the secrets in the game as we go through. But that was really interesting for us in terms of the design of it, of going, you've got your kind of, your conscious, explicit play experience, but games are always constantly manipulating your mood and your feelings and the decisions you're making. And so really trying to create a space that had all of these kind of subliminals in it was a really interesting thing that we wanted to do, both with the original, and then I think it got lifted up into a much more sophisticated version when we went to the commercial, because Rob was able to bring that sort of level of artistry to the visuals that really got that kind of sense of hidden meaning in there. And that was really important, given how kind of complex and symbol heavy and poetic the story is, where a lot of it doesn't actually make any sense, but it's about kind of leaving you with these, I guess, like the half-life of ideas and thoughts that you can't quite shake that stay with you. So we really were trying to get that blend of how music, story and visuals could all create that really sort of uncanny structure that you wouldn't necessarily be able to define properly, but you knew it kind of had a meaning that was staying with you.
Yeah, I get. Sorry, I should have known. This isn't not as. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to, like, not just like
So something I wanted to
be
do
the
as an
showcase for the diet or their
was
commentary,
create,
but I'm trying to
some
listen
kind
to
of
it too and not
reward for the player
click on other
and explore
things.
the island. There are some areas of the game where it's a little bit more quieter. There's no music or there's no voiceovers. So I kind of wanted to create a bit of an incentive for people to explore. And you'll find around the island that these kind of like random scattered items that are usually slightly out of place from the environment themselves, but in another aspect they actually bring a little bit of story to the island itself, usually to the island or to the actual protagonists or the characters that surround it. So you'll find that around the island these little props and stuff. Just keep your eye out for it if you're exploring.
Right, like if I, that symbol, if I, in my first playthrough, if I had found that, like having the car parts there and the symbol, it's like, that's weird, what's going on here? But, I didn't know I would miss that, because I don't know, when you're first playing, you don't know which way's the progression way and which way's just like the
island. What's really
alternate.
interesting about this is it's one of those times when your kind of aspirations as an artist and the practical realities kind of dovetail. We knew that we had to have some way of limiting the player from disappearing off the play space, and when we made the original, it was a mod, and because it was a Half-Life 2 mod, you kind of had Eastern
Man of the
European
Rocks.
city,
I think that's for
spaceship,
walking.
or blasted, desolate landscape. We had three options if you didn't want to start making any other assets. So it started off with these practical constraints. We don't want to set it on a spaceship, we don't want to set it in an Eastern European city, so it's got to be on this kind of like this desolate landscape. And we want to limit the player, so an island seems like a natural choice. And it's really interesting how you start from that, and we had this big lump of clay on a table that we were carving out paths and things to annoying the cleaners and things like that. And Jess and I were talking, and Jess started making sort of snippets of music to kind of go in there. And then all of a sudden we just went, oh, that's the story. Oh, that's what happened here. But it really started, I think, from the place. And when we started looking at photographs of Bore, we started going and reading some of the history behind it. Suddenly that was it. And it just was really, really naturally became, this is the place, this is what happened here, this is how it feels. And then everything else kind of coalesced around that.
Yeah, I think as an artist it made my job a lot easier, because those islands are so kind of like the environment is kind of hostile. You're out there in the Hebrides. You've got this kind of like inclement weather. You've got cold, rain, snow.
Okay, I get. Sorry, I'm not trying to cut them off either.
One of
I
the
feel
things
bad
you're
for
always
going
trying to
over,
do
but like,
as a
I want to
composer
keep walking.
is create memorable themes.
We can't get. Can we not get these like
slight
things on a
confession
queue
is
or
that
something?
Probably the most memorable theme, which is Remember in Dear Esther, wasn't actually created for the game. Rob's looking shocked. So it was actually from a piece of choral music that I'd written years before, based on a Christina Rossetti poem called Remember. And one of the things I was talking about earlier was how I didn't have any budget. So I had this piece of choral music, and I thought, hang on, this is absolutely perfect for Esther. But I don't want to use all of it. So the only bit that you actually get in the game is the first line of the choral piece of music. But that actually went on to form the main theme of the music that I wrote. And I think for me it's really interesting about how things that you've written earlier, years before,
Sorry, I'm very interested in this,
White
but
Lines.
just want to keep moving.
Yeah.
I
They actually
wish
did
like the
this.
commentary
It
could
was
be
really quite
cute.
fun.
I don't want to wait
Historical document.
around.
They used to do this on Bora and the Hebrides. If the disease broke out,
Really?
they'd actually chip out and expose the chalk. So if you're on a boat and you were coming to the island, you know not to land because it was infectious, which is the coolest, most amazing. It's one of those things where you go, it's almost impossible as a writer to come up with something as cool as that. It just has to be something that was actually done, and it's so sad as well. And I love this bit and the fact that we can do it because it.
That makes
It
sense
feels
now. That's
really
actually
real
that is
because it
really cool.
references a real thing, and I know there's something really special about that. But it was always one of those bits in the game that I thought we've got to be able to represent this somehow. We have to be able to get these things in here.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. I actually didn't know that was actually based historically in real life, but that's really cool because I mean my thing about the White Lines is that it was this completely surreal thing, but also it was kind of it just added to the landscape. It's like, whoa, what the hell is that? And putting that into the game was kind of challenging because to me it just seemed like, oh, it's going to be really hard to pull off in a way that's
Sorry, I feel bad every time.
something that I wanted to bring through in the
Because
art
it feels
of the
like
game
it's
was-
gonna ramble
was
on
the
for a little
same
bit.
kind of fidelity that you find in both Jessica's music and Dan's writing. In the same kind of way that you have all of these little details, these very close attentions to detail that kind of really bring richness to the story. And something that was missing in the original mod version was just this lack of a visual layer of story. And something that I did throughout the art of the game is to add in all these little details here and there, little bits of story, little links to certain things that you may or may not hear or see, just a layer of richness in the world and give you some kind of reward for exploring. So keep your eye out as you look around.
Well, okay.
There's
Sorry.
a scene in Donnie Darko
Just-
where Drew Barrymore's playing his English teacher. And she talks
There's
about
so little
Salvador
space
being the
between,
most beautiful word in the
commentary
English language,
points.
and about it's the sound of the words together. And Dear Esther actually comes from the introduction to From a Faith No More song, the Crab song on the first album, Introduce Yourself. And there's a point where, I think it's Chuck at that point, is the vocalist before Mike Patton, just says, Dear Esther. And it really lodged with me because the sound Dear Esther, it just has a really amazing sound to it. And I think when we started making it, and the idea of it being these series of letters to someone came through, it just came straight back out of going, that's just a really beautiful sounding combination of words. And I think that really sums up the whole approach to the writing in Dear Esther of what's the most beautiful combination of words and images we can put together, and to do it that way rather than writing a traditional plot as such. So yeah, Dear Esther, Faith No More and Doom, that's where it comes from.
Fair enough. It is kind of cool. There is something about saying Dear Esther that rolls off the tongue really well.
I think the central question to the entire experience for most people that have played it or are talking about it is this idea of, is the island real? Is what's going on a literal event of a man walking across a Scottish island, or is it a dream that he's had? Does the island even exist? And one of the things that we try to do with the writing is to constantly lull the player into a position where they got an understanding, they made a decision about what they thought was going on, and then to undercut it So you never actually were able to settle on any one interpretation. And that was the challenge I set myself when I wrote the original mod, was can we put a story in a game that not only lends itself to multiple interpretations, but there is no stable interpretation. Every single interpretation you have will always have questions, and you'll never be able to fully trust what you think you understand about the game. So it's challenging, I think, for that result. It becomes quite a challenging kind of game story because of that, because you don't ever get that situation to go, I understand it now, I can walk away from this thing and it's all closed off and it's tidy. It was a very deliberate attempt to say, no matter where you think you are with this story, you're always questioning whether or not that's right.
Yeah, that mission statement definitely is like how I feel about Dear Esther. There's a lot of interesting threads, but I'm never, again, as I said, no combination of interpretations feels like totally right. But there's something so unsatisfying about that for me, and that's kind of why I feel so reserved about this. On one hand, I commend them for pulling off that feeling. On the other hand, I'm not sure I'm the biggest fan.
One of the things that's been most commented on with the audio and the music in Dear Esther is how sparse it is. And that was a really deliberate tactic. I wanted to leave room for the player to think and to dream and to wonder and to put their own interpretation into what was happening. And I think the problem with so much modern media is how bombarded we are constantly. It's the kind of MTV, flash in your face, constant music. And Dan and I watch a lot of drama together, and that really is constant
Endless,
music.
which is constantly telling you what you should feel, like really clearly, and it's like being kind of beaten up by the music sometimes.
And when you read a lot of reviews of Dear Esther, a lot of people say they had this time to think and to interpret, and that was one of their favourite things, that they placed themselves so directly into the game, and it's their experience. And I think that's actually the greatest success of the game on all points, from the story to Rob's art to the music, is we all left space for the player to dream.
Yeah, again, I see all their points. It's just like, my point to that, though, is, you know, it left me wondering, it's like, yeah, what was that? That was weird. Better wait till the next, journal point to get more information to help figure it out. And, I just kind of stopped and was just waiting for the next thing to pop up.
There's a lot of places in the game where you see a lot of strange things, and this is very deliberate. One of the things we wanted to do is just kind of like not spoon feed the player every little piece of story. We kind of just, some things are literally just in there to just kind of let you think and let you decide on whatever you want to bring to the story yourself. But so it's kind of like I approached it like an impressionist painting, where you've got like this kind of very vague outline of things, but if you stare at it enough, you can kind of like fill in the spaces, and kind of the image comes together on its own. So a lot of these kind of strange pieces of geography and stuff, that's really kind of deliberate in some ways, just to kind of keep the player's mind open and kind of bring their own interpretations of the story through that.
Right. Okay. Again, yeah, definitely, this island got an interesting look and feel to it. And yeah, weird anomalies and like, all these crevasses and weird slants and rock formations are at least some kind of interesting alternate, look. Was carrying on. Sorry, don't have much.
When I was originally thinking about how to write the music for the game, I suddenly realised that you don't see anybody in the game, and the most important character as such is the island itself. So one of the things that I did with the music was to write the island as if she or he were a character in its own right. And that's really important, I think, that you're going through this space and actually it's completely devoid of people, but the music in a way populates the island, and the voice of the island speaks to you through the music.
Which is interesting, because I think that's really come on in terms of later games we've done, that sowed the seeds for the way in which we approach music in Rapture, where it was very specifically the voice of characters. And Machine for Pigs as well, where the music was about being Lily's voice in the game, Lily's representation in the game. So it's interesting how, looking back on Esther, a lot of those kind of ideas were tried out here that then came on to take other forms in stuff we've done since.
I was gonna say, like, wait, those games came out way later than Esther, right, Landmark Edition, and Landmark Edition specifically added the commentary, so this is, yeah, like they said, remake of a, you know, whatever.
Alright, let's talk about walking. Let's do it. We're gonna address the elephant in the room, the very, very slow-moving elephant in the room. So this might be a longer conversation because it kind of fits with that. So Esther was the first of the what are now called walking simulators, and it was really interesting that for us it didn't feel that weird to have a game that was slower than normal, where actually there was lots of time to just walk around and think and look at things. And it was amazing at the time how this was seen as completely revolutionary, and it's really interesting, and it's amazing to see how many other games have kind of like taken it on board. For me, it came from, I didn't see it as being odd to have a game where very little happened, where you thought about what you were doing. For me, it was kind of interesting that you could play some of the best moments in Doom are the bits where nothing's happening and you're just doing it, or System Shock, or those games that I absolutely love. Those quiet moments were the really powerful ones. But Esther is definitely slower than a lot of games, and I think that's actually why it's lasted. I think if we did have moments where we went, should it be faster, should we put a sprint button in, but I'm so pleased that we kind of held our nerve and went, no, just as like in real life, I don't run everywhere because that would be weird. It's okay to have a game where you don't run everywhere, and actually it is a bit weird to run everywhere, but if you're going to do that, then you've got to support it in other ways, and I think the music was a really powerful way of supporting that change of pace.
What's really funny for me though, Dan, is that shamefully I'd never played a game before I worked on Dear Esther, so I didn't realise that all games weren't like this, which is now looking back really naive. But I didn't realise that
cute.
Games didn't have, always have, this slow pace, and I thought there were lots of meditative games out there, and that actually wasn't really the case at the time, and that's exploded since. But in
yeah,
terms of
that
the
is
music,
definitely true. Like, even some of the heavy action
that
games
pace
now
that
have
you'd set
slower, methodical
emotionally
moments. Like,
felt
even the new
really
God of
important.
War
So
has,
if
like,
you
its
listen to the
slow,
music,
like,
actually,
introspective
the BPM
beats.
It is at a very slow walking speed. And it just almost, there's a lot of things now that say it's called entrainment, that it slows your heartbeat, or it can speed up your heartbeat when you listen to music. And actually, I think what the Esther music does really successfully is it makes you almost accept, and more than accept, that speed, you actually start to feel that's the pace of your journey, and that I really like that about the music, actually.
And it just, it makes you just comfortable with that pace too. I think it just eases you into it. You feel relaxed.
Okay, is that commentary done? Sorry, now it's like there's also, like, not a lot of, for as much walking as you do, the commentary tracks are kind of very close together. So it's like you have to stop walking in order to, like, pick up the next one. I wish they could queue.
There is a really important kind of design feature as well as its place within the story. And that, I think, came from, it was really interesting, it being a Half-Life mod to begin with, and the Citadel in Half-Life 2, that it tells you how far you are through the game. You're always looking up to the skyline, am I closer to the Citadel, can I see it? And it lets you know how near you are to the end of the game. And it was really important because Esther's so open in a way, and because there isn't this, you're not using kind of shootouts or kind of gating it with combat encounters to kind of constantly keep you moving. That it was really, really important that you always had that focal point of going, I know exactly from the beginning of the game, virtually right from the start, you know where you're going, you know where the game's going to end up, and you know that sooner or later you're going to be either at the base of that thing or climbing that thing, and it's all...
Right.
So
Sorry,
something you'll
it's...
notice as you
trying to
look
move
around
on.
the environment is, from a distance you see the landscape. It's kind of a beautiful place in some ways, but something I wanted to bring to the game was that there's this second layer beneath the surface, whereas if you look at things closely, you see that the actual island itself is very polluted. It's kind of very rotten. Everywhere you look, every rock, every grass surface, it has this layer of filth on it, and it's kind of been put in there just to kind of emphasize further that this island's a really unpleasant place to live. It's like if you
that's something
scratch
I
the surface,
noticed.
You see like just how corrupt this island is.
Yeah, like, let's see. It's just like in the ground, like I said, repeating textures of like, what kind of looks like a newspaper or whatever that is. And, I thought it's like, is this going to be a story about pollution or something first? And just like, rust and scrap everywhere.
We cast and did all the voice direction for Esther ourselves for the mod, and it was basically Jess and I on a casting website just listening to people's show reels and finding what's the voice of this thing. And there was never any question about Nigel. I think we heard his show reel for the first time around. It's probably been listened to sort of 30 or 40 actors, and we started listening to his show reel and just both looked at each other and went, that's it, that's him. And it was amazing when Nigel came in. We had, I think, a day and a half to do the whole thing.
Jesus.
And he just did that amazing thing that really, really great actors did. If he just walked in, got in front of the microphone, and more or less did the entire thing in one take. And we did hardly any retakes on anything. It just felt like his instinct for the character in the game was so strong that he just, without virtually any direction, just came in and just got it. And one of the hardest things with the voiceover that we did was when we went from the mod, which had 3 potential narrative units per queue, to 4 potential narrative units per queue, was not only finding new bits of writing that kind of complemented and played off what was there in the original mod, but for Nigel to come back in, nearly 5 years later, and to just re-find that voice in exactly the same way and deliver it in a way that fitted in and complemented it was a real testament to his ability as an actor, I think. That apart from we had spent quite a lot of time trying to make the sound actually sound the same in terms of mic placement and things like that, but in terms of the actual delivery of those new monologues, you wouldn't know that was both written and acted sort of 4.5 years after the original thing was done. So the one person who's not in the room sort of today but deserves a huge amount of credit for how the game kind of eventually was delivered, but also I think in terms of how the game has lasted, a huge amount of respect needs to go to Nigel Carrington for his work on it.
Yeah, he definitely, the guy who narrates as Paul does a really good job. And I noticed there was like a slight difference in audio between some takes. I wasn't sure if maybe that was just like the writing or how much like Paul was emoting at the time, especially near the end. I don't know if those were different or part of the same take. I don't know, but yeah. And it's kind of funny. It's like we have a day and a half to do this. It's weird how like these walking sims like Dear Esther and Gone Home seem to have been such like on a tight schedule, despite Anyways.
So this hole in the ground was kind of a difficult thing in some ways. It's a bit of a challenging aspect of the game. Because, in some ways, it kind of like, I think for me, we wanted to have this kind of this pit here, and I wanted the player to be able to actually go as close as possible and like look over the edge and kind of have this feeling of dread and stuff. But the other issue that we faced was like, what happens if the player just jumps into the hole? Like we have no real death in the game, and from a design point of view, Dan, I mean, I don't know what you
it was really hard because it was a game where we couldn't let the player die. We didn't want to have respawns, but we had to handle the fact that there would be both accidents where the player would fall off a cliff or something, but also the deliberate urges as a player.
Yeah.
The first thing you're going to do is go, great, there's an ocean, how far out can I go? Or
Yeah,
there's a cliff that's really
yeah.
high, can I jump off it? And how do you have death in a game where you can't have the player die? Because if the player starts breaking up the experience by dying and reloading, then you're in you start breaking the experience a lot. So
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want to also have like artificial boundaries, where it's like an invisible wall. Like if you take a look through the game, you'll never see a place where you think you can get to, but you can't. There's always some kind of actual natural boundary or man-made boundary. So yeah, that was the other thing. We didn't really want to create this invisible wall around this thing. So
it kind of the whole drove the way in which that sort of the very weird audio visual, probably one of the most dreamlike bits in the game, where if you do die and you get the kind of the heartbeat and the the strange flashes of visuals. And I think in a lot of ways, if we hadn't had the hole there, and we hadn't had a place where we go, right, players will jump in this hole. We have to start from that basis. They will throw themselves down this hole.
Yeah, sorry, I get the rest, but yeah, they're right.
One of the really important jobs of a composer, I think, is to provide the player or the listener with different emotional tones and states. And up until this point in the game, the music has been very sparse, very intimate, and very isolating in a way. But the island is also a beautiful and magnificent place, and what I wanted to do at this point for the first time in the game is to create something that was really epic. So we go from that shift in scale where it's very intimate and small to suddenly realising that this is an extraordinary and magical place to be, as well as a difficult and quite sad and melancholic place to be. So the string players were instructed at this point to play with much more vibrato. Up until this point they've played in a very sort of Scottish style actually, no vibrato, very plain playing. But this was a really beautiful cue to write actually, because that has that scale. You suddenly realise that the island is really big, and you have this beautiful vista, and the music then shifts so the player can actually just for a moment, I think, enjoy being where they are.
Yeah, I think that's it. Can I? Yeah, I was going to say, this is actually one of my favourite parts of the game. It's just where everything, all the elements kind of come together perfectly. You've got the music, which just is just epic, as Jess has said. You've got the landscape, which is kind of like this big open space.
Sorry, I feel bad every time I cut them off, but
there is a randomised chance that you can find an ultrasound picture on the table, and I think
I've seen it twice in 2 playthroughs.
Instance of randomisation in the game that is like the pinnacle of it, because the idea that Esther was pregnant when she died changes everything emotionally. It's about how you understand the story. And not to say that you don't care as much if you don't find it, but it just adds this other layer of just the ground falls away from him the first time I saw it, and the meaning of the crash in Esther's death just means so much more when you go, it's not just about her, there was an unborn child here. And I think that's where the randomisation just hits its absolute peak, because it's one tiny detail that may or may not be there. But if it's there, it's going to fundamentally change the way you feel about the entire thing. And that's the strength that the randomisation elements in Esther kind of provide, that you go, your likely kind of feeling about the story and your understanding about the story can be changed so absolutely by the occurrence or not of one tiny little prop detail. And that's something which, those moments I think are what make it really, really special. So it's for me, it's almost like the most important prop in the game, because when it happens, it's so profound.
Yeah, and it's again, it's just something that makes each playthrough more personal, I think. This is what I love reading about, people finding these things and going, holy shit, I've just found this one thing that's going to change it. That's changed my interpretation completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't think much of it when I found that picture, because, it was heavily implied Esther was dead, but we didn't really know for sure. And, and finding that picture just seems like it's tragic. It certainly adds, poignancy, but it also kind of feels unearned, like it's just like an extra thing to make you feel bad about the situation.
So as you leave the bothy and the sea,
you add a dead kid to any proceeding, and suddenly it's much worse.
We called it a ghost story, but
and it
was
just
no
kind of felt like
really. We
kind of token,
dreamy, hallucinatory type thing. But when it came out, people started coming back and saying, this game is absolutely terrifying. I was really, really frightened. And that was really amazing. And I think it's because nothing happens. We're so trained in games to go, there's stimulus all the time, that if nothing happens, you're waiting for something to happen. And I tend to go back to again and again, the whole sequence in Dead Space 2, when you go back to the Ishimura, and it's like the best bit of Dead Space 2, because for what feels like hours, but it's probably only about 15 minutes, nothing happens and no necromorph comes at you, and it's absolutely terrifying, because it's just this space and you're just left in it. So I think the bird here is really interesting, because it can actually really, really make you jump. But I don't know if that was part of why people were saying that the game was really scary, but it was a real surprise when people started coming back and saying, this is a frightening game. And I don't know how much of that is to do with the ideas in the game are frightening when you think about them, and how much of it is to do with just the emptiness and the lack of kind of things in the game make it a really quite stressful or quite frightening place. But it was a real surprise, I think, that sort of reaction from a lot of players when we shipped it.
Yeah, it's similar to Gone Home and just like, it's so mundane. But at the same time, like in Gone Home, like there was a storm brewing and, weird creaking noises, and you're finding, depending on how you find stuff, certain hints that there's something actually in this house or something. Here's just an empty island, and kind of after the first chapter of seeing no life, it just kind of like, there must be no life anywhere. It's kind of how I felt.
So
I don't mean to bash this. I feel like these are really nice people, and I see all the things they're going for, just did not hit me.
And also the kind of themes of the game. Like, tech-wise, we were never ever gonna kind of achieve photorealism. And I think that was a good thing. I mean, really, it made us sort of stretch out into other areas, and for me as an artist, it kind of made me think a little bit more creatively. I did a few tests at the beginning, and when I realized this wasn't possible, I kind of went back and I kind of did some research on different styles, and one of the ones that really struck me was this kind of impressionistic painterly style, where it's kind of like there's just enough shape and color there for you to form an image, but a lot of it is just your imagination. It's kind of like the believability of the environment is in your mind. So this is something that I really wanted to bring over into the game, and you'll see a lot of landscapes that kind of look very surreal, very kind of unreal, and that's mainly due to this impressionistic style.
Okay, it definitely is effective.
Let's talk about some of the inspirations behind it. I'm on a strict "you don't talk about Stalker" kind of thing going on here. But
I've got to play Stalker. I've heard mixed things, but mixed things way I might actually like.
And I think that was one of the major things behind it in terms of when people talk about game inspirations. I mean, for me, there's a lot of FPS stuff in there, Doom, System Shock, but I think Stalker probably more than anything else. And Roadside Picnic, the Strugatsky novel that Stalker's based on, of the idea of this incredible space that you didn't understand, that's simultaneously beautiful and threatening. And I think...
Oh, this is a traffic cone. I did not realize what that was my first playthrough.
As well, his version of Stalker, that you want to have this place that you feel rather than think about. And for me, that was like really kind of core to all of the inspirations for the game, was this is a space that is about feeling, not thinking.
Yeah, I think the movies in particular, I think I hadn't watched the movies. I'd read the book and I played the game, but when I watched the movie, it kind of all made sense to me, like why I like the game so much and why I like the story. It's just like every shot is like a painting. It's like every shot has its story to tell. There's very little dialogue in the actual movie itself. There's just these long, lingering shots, and each shot is amazingly beautiful, and in its kind of desolation. And for me, that was like a huge influence, like trying to bring some of that through into the environments. So that is definitely something I'm going to struggle not to talk about. But the game as well. I'd say the actual Stalker game has a big place in my heart. Like gaming-wise, it's one of the reasons I got into game art in the first place.
Yeah.
So that to me is a big part of it too.
I should see if I can get Stalker on Xbox. Anyways, so yeah. I'm just thinking. I'm trying to process. I'm looking at my clock as well. This is taking. Yeah, I might have to split this up.
One of the more interesting and challenging things to do in the visual side of things is to kind of create an emotional connection with the player. With the music, it's very strong, and the dialogue can kind of help you to feel what the character's feeling, but to kind of really create an atmosphere and to create emotion, it's very difficult. So I designed a few things very subtly within the environment to kind of plant imagery into your mind and kind of make you feel certain things.
I kind of ran ahead, and I see the cross.
With the shipwreck on the
and
beach, you can kind of
this kind of like angelic course as we walk towards this cave.
This real like it's like a cross sticking up. It's this kind of semi-religious imagery, but it really kind of, it's not obvious, it's not in your face, it's just kind of like something that makes you feel like something you know. And
this is another of my favourite bits in the game, where you come along the edge of the sort of gully and you find hundreds of books, and it's one of the first times where most explicitly there's the suggestion that nothing you're seeing is real, because there's just no way that this can exist, and it's a really amazing, uncanny moment. But it works, I think, for me, because you just go, I don't understand it, but it's lodged somewhere in my head, and I can't get rid of it, and I can't.
How did I not notice
this.
these books the first time I played?
Like, in terms of my influences from books,
well, it's all the same book.
Sort of stuff like with Burroughs, Cut Up, and things like that going on. But it comes to the kind of books that I really love, that, like Roadside Picnic, or the other one by the Strugatskys as well, I absolutely love, is The Ugly Swans. That's just full of these images that you go, I don't understand, I literally have no idea what's going on here, but I can't shake it, it's just got its hooks in me. And I think more recently you've got books like Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation does this so well, where nothing is understandable, but you feel the logic, but you can't understand the logic, but you feel like the logic's there. And that, I think, is a really powerful thing that games are so good at doing, of creating these things. And I think where a lot of game writing for me becomes kind of the wheels fall off it, is that they have these amazing ideas, and then suddenly there's this huge rush of going, right, we've developed this mythos and we've shown you all the tips of the iceberg, which are really interesting, but now we're just going to show you the whole iceberg. And actually that's never that satisfactory as a player, because it robs the mystery. And I think the best game writing is those
ironic how Dark Souls came out the same year as this remake.
Just outside the edge of my vision, or just on the edge of my hearing, but it's the confidence to go, that's it, that's all you get, and the rest.
Right.
One of the really important images in the game is the radio mast, and the soundscapes that I wrote for the game are really tied into this idea. So it's the concept of the tortured sounds that they're so broken down, they're so manipulated, and it really is supposed to represent the inner state of the protagonist at this point. It's that fractured understanding. So it kind of works on two levels, actually. We have the narrator who's trying to understand the journey that he's on, and we also have the audience's journey and their struggle for comprehension to understand what's going on in the game. So this distortion, this breaking down, this fragmented, kind of tortured sound really ties into the idea of the radio mast, and that idea of communication, actually, that the game is trying to communicate something to you, the narrator's trying to tell you something, but it's so difficult to understand what that is.
Yeah. Alright. Okay, that's actually, yeah. Okay, I might stop for right now. I honestly, for some reason, my dumbass thought, I could go through all the commentary and do another playthrough and be done already. Oh, right. We're waking up from the crash. So, I think we'll stop for now. Next time we continue, we will carry on. We'll do the second half of the game, get through the cave, and, yeah, finish up the commentary, I guess. God damn it, I'm mulling over a second playthrough. Technically a third playthrough. Playthrough after this, just to, do the base game again without the commentary. Christ. Okay. We're going to wrap up here for right now. Next time we continue, we will carry on, and we will take care of the second half and hear more of the commentary, and I'll continue on my thoughts. Sorry, I'm trying to, make this interesting. I'm not trying to just showcase the commentary, even though I'm also skipping a bunch of it. I'm trying to, issue out my own thoughts on the game as well, and that's kind of why I decided to do another part, and I figured with the commentary would be a good way to add things like it did when I played Gone Home. But yeah, sorry, I feel really bad for showcasing the commentary like this, but yeah, I'm trying to issue my own thoughts on this and trying to develop it a little bit further. I am appreciating the game a little bit more, with Gone Home, hearing the commentary and what it actually took to do this. I kind of appreciate, their angles and such. It's still not hitting me the way, I've seen it hit other people, but that's just me. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here for right now. Next time we continue the other half of the commentary and the, game. So, with that all being said, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe and all that. This is Timmara, signing off.